right, let's do this. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the YooperFarmer podcast, vlog, YouTube channel. We are again out here, actually in the mudroom, not the garage. Our esteemed guest is back again, but we're doing a little role reversal here. So before we get too much into that, tonight we're drinking Appleton Estate Signature. Appleton Estate Rums was a rum that actually we both liked in college. So anytime they have a new brand, I usually pick it up. It's quite yummy and delicious. Mine's in a rocks glass straight. What's yours in, Teacher Lena?
A regular glass with pop.
It's a little rum and coke. Definitely has that Appleton, a bit of a salt to it, but not bad, actually quite good. So if you might have noticed, I'm actually on the wrong side of the camera. I'm on the guest side, and Teacher Lena is actually on the host side. I tried to get her to do the intro and whatnot and kind of do a straight reversal here of the roles, but she refused that. I got to be gentle with my guest. As she's a little nervous about being on camera in general. So what's the plan for tonight, Teacher Lena?
I think the plan was for me to ask the homeschooling dad here some questions.
So I'm now in the interview hot seat. So with no further ado, take it over, Teacher Lena. You do your own little intro if you want, even.
Oh, I don't think I need to do an intro, although I do need to make a correction. I'm on camera a lot for my job, so I'm just not used to going off script.
Wow, there's some scripts. Gotcha.
So you're a homeschooling dad. How do you feel about that?
Well, to be fair, I'm not the homeschool teacher in our family. That's my wife. But yes, we do homeschool, and I'm the dad of the relationship or the spouse. I actually don't like homeschooling. Never have. I actually had a very negative opinion of it before we started.
Okay, so why did you have a negative opinion?
So when I grew up, we had a lot of homeschooling families. It was a very rural part of Michigan. And some of them seemed to do well. Other kids seemed to be quite intelligent. Others, they had a lot of problems with really basic knowledge, basic math skills. They'd be given a book to read and then kind of told to just go work, play on the computer, or hang out with friends. So I kind of had a negative opinion based on the homeschoolers that I knew at the time.
So you attributed that, say, math struggles or inabilities with the fact that they were homeschooled only?
Well, and we had one of the individuals I knew, he was in 11th grade and couldn't do a simple 9 times 3.
Okay.
And he would admit that his homeschooling was more of or less structured and more of a life skills, like how do you do stuff around the farm, how do you build rockets, how do you design better video game levels and the different I forget what game it was. It was Counter-Strike, where you could build your own levels. He was a pro at doing that. But his parents, or his mom at least, didn't put as much emphasis on the real basic math, English, stuff like that.
Okay. I only ask because the suggestion there is that only homeschooled students have struggles with math or English or some similar fashion, but you could see that in any school setting.
That's true. There's definitely kids who are left behind, even though we have the No Child Left Behind in Michigan. There's definitely, you see that in public school. I just tended to see it a lot more in the homeschooling, a few of the homeschooling families. Now, there were some that were pretty good and pretty spot on and more advanced than public school kids, but they seem to be more the exception to the rule than the rule itself.
Okay. So what changed your mind about homeschooling, or what got you into homeschooling then?
Well, my son was having problems in public school, and the public school system really did fail him on many levels. In fact, we had teachers that flat out told us he'd never learn to write his name. He would always be in special needs programs. So I knew that wasn't the case, and so I decided to, with my wife doing a lot of the heavy lifting, we'd pull our son. And at the time, we had our daughter, who was about a year, 18 months, 2 years younger at the time. She, of course, was home with mom while dad was off while I was off at work. And she would just sit there and do homeschooling with her brother. Well, I saw in her, it really hit. I mean, here is probably a 2-year-old with her 4-year-old brother, and she's, saying her ABC. She's doing simple reading, simple math, shape recognition, color recognition, compared to her other 2-year-old counterparts, which would just, sit in the corner and drool. It really seemed that it was hitting for her and making her thrive. So that really got me to change my mind.
Okay, so you said your mind has changed. Now do you like homeschooling?
No, I still hate it. And that's more of a selfish reason. I'll tell people whenever I'm asked that I don't... I really wanted to have more of that bake sales and cookies and fights with friends and being bullied, that stuff outside of the curriculum, where, it's just stuff like the PTA meetings and basketball games that I really wanted to be more a part of, but that's kind of just extra stuff. That really doesn't help a child, in my opinion, in my wife's opinion, build them to be a better person. That's just kind of life experiences that they, share with their kids.
Okay. So the PTA, the group events, I guess, public school events, and maybe sports and fundraisers. Can you not get that in the homeschool community?
You can. It depends on the area you're in. Some are. It depends why people are homeschooling. Some are homeschooling because they're anti-establishment, so they don't want to meet up with people. They don't want to have groups. They want to be by themselves. Their family unit is extremely important. Which is nice. It takes a lot more work on the parents' part. So if we want our kids to be in, let's say, basketball, we have to find the basketball league. We usually have to pay for stuff like jerseys and practice time. And so it's there. It just takes more work on our part, where if they're in public school, you know basketball starts up every November. Football starts up every, May and then runs through September. It's easier where it's just turnkey, and there's usually a lot more support for kids to be involved in public school versus homeschooling.
Okay. And as a homeschool dad, do you feel that you are an active role in the homeschool, or are you just kind of on to the side while mom does most of the work? Because you mentioned mom does the heavy lifting.
Yeah, and it really is, in my opinion, my wife does all the majority of the teaching. I'm called in for tutoring and special events, and I always tell people I get to do the fun stuff in homeschooling. It's the science experiments, it's working out in the garage. So I think there is more put on one spouse or the other. But in that regards, though, a lot of what the dads do is to support homeschooling, whether that's financially or coming up with ideas, doing research, shuttling kids to and fro.
Very good. So what kind of experiments, you mentioned some experiments and stuff, what kind of experiments or hands-on activities do you do to develop the curriculum or expand the education?
Well, we do stuff like a lot of the science experiments. Like we mummified some Cornish hens, which Dad got to get hands on, and stuff Cornish hens full of salt and other almond, other stuff to preserve it. Then there's the more practical stuff, whether that's building chairs to learn structural engineering and designs. There's stuff like the vinegar volcanoes to show chemical reactions. And then there's a lot of that what they say, the in-job or in-time learning, or unschooling learning that Dad's looked upon. So if I'm doing a project, it really is, instead of just having the kids help, it has to become a lesson where we talk about hanging shelves and why it's important to make sure you hit studs versus drywall, and structural integrities and stuff like that.
So teachable moments.
Teachable moments, yeah, that's a good way to put that.
So life lessons and teachable moments.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you're not a huge fan of homeschooling, but you say you think it works really well. Right?
I do, and I'm honest with my kids. If any of them want to go into public school, they can do it. I don't force any of them to be homeschooled, but we look at a lot of our children read at a very, very early age. They're excited about going to school, which you don't see in public school kids. Usually it's a drag. They seem to, especially when put up against their peers, have a lot more advantage of better intellect and intelligence than their public school peers. But now I'm very stern and strict that if the kids start slipping, and I think that public school would fill that gap better, I will send them in a second to public school because I want them to excel. But right now they are above and beyond doing better than what I see their cohorts in the similar grades doing.
Okay. So you feel that they're getting a better education at home right now.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. What is the hardest part of being a homeschool dad then?
Well, one, you're definitely an outcast in the homeschool communities. Dads show up with the homeschool mom groups or whatnot. You get kind of the stink eye. You're kind of, not accepted into the different groups. There is that constant, because you're not there with the lessons, you have a skewed view towards the negative. So if you're doing, let's say, cooking with your daughter, and you say, okay, we're going to double the recipe, so if I have 2/3 cups of milk, what's double that? And they stutter and can't think of the answer on the fly. As the father, I'll instantly jump to, well, homeschooling is clearly not working. Where when I am a part of the curriculum, the few times I have helped teach, that's not really the case. Usually there's, they do understand fractions for whatever reason. 2/3 doubling that kind of just tripped them up. Maybe they weren't ready for dad to actually ask them that question. They didn't understand what I was asking, but there's always that feeling that the kids aren't getting enough, or that you're always worried about that, so you try to look for it, that confirming bias. So you look for the negatives. Although your daughter can read, at a college level and comprehend at a college level, the fact that she can't do a simple x equals equation, I'm going to look more towards that than the fact that she's actually excelling in all these other areas.
And what do you do about that confirming bias?
Usually I yell a lot. No. A lot of it is just stepping back and having an open communication with my wife about what I'm seeing, what she's seeing, talk about what's actually going on in school, and just being honest with each other. There have been quite a few times actually where we both were like, maybe it is best for them to be public schooled. So it was a stop moment where, okay, let's slow things down. We'll talk to the kids about working harder on something, or see if maybe they would think they'd excel in a public school setting. And we've actually offered that quite a few times, and a lot of times every time they've thought about it and turned us down and said no, they prefer to stay public school. Or private, homeschool, excuse me.
Homeschool, very good. So, we've talked about some downsides, we've talked about some upsides. What is one thing that you wish you would have known going into homeschooling? Because it sounds like you didn't go into homeschooling with the intent to homeschool, so you weren't prepared for it.
Yeah, we had talked about maybe homeschooling them when they hit middle or high school. I very much believe in having a child, once they really pick their career path, to focus on that, like you see in a lot of European countries and even South American countries, where you don't go through this general education of learning humanities if you're going to go be a welder. You're still touch on it, but let's really learn those job specifics so you're more prepared to go out in the community. As far as like what other things I wish I would have known, a lot of it comes down to commitment, knowing how much limited resources there really are for homeschooling families. We kind of hooked up with HLSDA, and they make it sound like it's a turnkey, simple procedure. You can jump right into it, which is what we did. We actually jumped into it. And I think we did pretty good. We did better than the public school was doing. but there's a lot of lack of support, which was quite surprising how much community and even family members really won't support your decision to homeschool. And it's even, we've had a lot of them see our children, and that's what usually it takes for them to have an extended time around our children before they'll really own up to and accept that this is the best choice for them. So knowing that before we got started would have been great. Maybe also knowing how expensive it can get. The curriculums. There's been a couple of years where I've honestly looked at getting a second job just to pay for the schooling material, and then realizing that you don't need all that stuff. A couple of years we bought a lot of stuff that looks great on paper. Oh, yep, we're definitely going to do the 114 science experiments. So we got a box full of experiments, and we did like 5. The kids still enjoyed it. They still learned a lot. The rest are sitting on a shelf just collecting dust.
I see. So you hear a lot about socialization and issues with socialization. Is that a thing?
I think it can be. That's something at least we actively try to manage with our children. I've met some homeschoolers who the parents actively don't socialize their kids. Again, one of the reasons people do is because they want the family unit to be stronger. They don't trust other people. They don't trust other kids. So they actively avoid social situations. And I truly believe some of the ones we met, the next serial killer in the United States is going to come from these families. But it is something we actively pursue our children to have these social interactions. And now it seems like our kids will socialize better than any public school kid I've ever seen. They're the first usually to offer to go make a friend. They're the first to volunteer to help out, to talk with someone else. They'll sit down and talk with someone they've never met before, which you don't see a lot. You don't see almost at all anymore in the public school setting. You have a lot of kids who are very shy. They form their cliques. They stay with their cliques. They won't venture out of them. So if done right, there's not a problem. I think it'll actually excel better. The only issue is it is something you have to actively kind of pursue, in my opinion.
Okay. So as a homeschool dad, what is something that you think you need to do to support your homeschool family, your wife, and throughout the endeavors? You mentioned some financial support, but what else?
Definitely get a second job for curriculum. That helps. A big part of it is having an open dialogue with my wife. So where I have some concerns about their education because she is the teacher, she's the one who's giving the information, she is a lot more. So being there to support her, tell her maybe if she's having a confirming bias, I can then show, well, no, did you look at this? Did you look at this? Being that second teacher or the subject matter expert, because I have a good medical and science background, so helping out with the science and doing some experiments where it's involved stuff like stuffing a chicken full of salt really didn't faze me one bit. So complementing what my wife does by doing what I'm good at, and then she does what she's good at, and then anything we're both not good at, we try to find outside resources. Doing research is also pretty big. Try and help support homeschooling and the homeschooling path that we choose. And then also just kind of trying to come up with other creative solutions. So helping with different ideas or interesting ideas that we wouldn't have thought of to try and direct that a little bit more.
Okay. So you mentioned curriculum, which can be, I think we mentioned in a previous discussion how expensive or how cheap it can be, and especially in comparison with some private schooling, which can range in $15,000 to $20,000 a year, depending on where your student is attending. So, with curriculum, do you help choose curriculum? How do you, as a homeschool dad, where do you fall in that decision making?
I mean, it's not. I'll be the first to say I believe that's my wife's form of porn. I will catch her probably even early April into May. She's already perusing over the catalogs and searching websites and really diving down, looking at what's available, what's out there. I will admit that I've done a lot of research, more than I ever thought I would, about teaching methods and types of curriculum, whether it's Was it the Suzanne
Charlotte Mason.
Charlotte Mason unschooling versus the Catholic schooling versus K-12 versus there's some Protestant curriculums out there, whether it's secular versus non-secular.
Oh, don't forget deschooling.
And deschooling. There's a lot of different types of ways to homeschool. Even getting into the I forget the name of the method where basically you let the kid pick their own. The Montessori methods, where they, it's really the child-directed method. So it's interesting in that regard to see that there's so many different ways to teach a kid, and it's very revealing actually, because you go into schools and there really is just like one method they use. Unless, again, like you mentioned, you go to a private school where they use these different methods. You normally only see a very narrow structure of how they set up their curriculums inside the school. So.
Okay. So you don't make many decisions when it comes to curriculum. Are you ever asked for your opinion as the homeschool dad, or?
I am, but I'll admit I'm not the subject matter expert in that, and I'd hate to really push my wife to get a certain curriculum and then it not work because it was something she wasn't comfortable with. So then the year flops. We have an off year because Dad really pushed for that curriculum. So I usually try to push my wife for her to pick it. I'll pay for it because it's what she is primarily going to be using.
I see. So because she's the teacher, she should be the one primary voice of what should be used.
Now I'll give my opinion, but sometimes it's like comparing a red apple to a slightly lesser red apple. In my opinion, you're still getting an apple and it's still red, and so sometimes that can get a little tedious to talk about, where we've had big discussions about doing the unschooling route where there's very little structure, to some of the very highly structured, almost like a K through 12 or those online public school versions. That is where we have a lot of good discussion, and I feel that we work as a unit to pick that path.
Okay, so the overall theme and planning of homeschooling, but not necessarily the nitty-gritty curriculum. What kind of curriculum does your family use?
Right now we do unschooling during the summers and weekends. So that's a lot of like, what is Dad or Mom doing? So if we're doing some sewing projects, Mom will teach a sewing lesson and talk about fabrics and materials. If Dad is doing maybe a home brewing project, like to homebrew, we'll do some chemistry lessons and baking lessons. We also hit a lot of like religious discussions and religious matters, especially on the weekends around church time. But we actually tend more towards during the week doing the morning a very structured with benchmarks and goals and worksheets, and you're going to have a test here and a test there and quizzes here. And then in the afternoon, it's kind of a mixture of a structured unschooling. So they use a computer-based program where they kind of pick and choose. Do they want to work on math? Do they want to work on reading? But yet they still have to complete math, reading, writing in a week period. But they have all week. So it's really them directing their studies, which I actually approve of and enjoy, because that's one of the things when I was in college, when I taught at college level, a lot of students coming out of public school have the biggest problem with, where they don't get that they choose. They choose what courses they take in college. They choose when they study. They choose when they do a term paper. They don't have someone directing them.
So they're learning more independent responsibility by giving these are the lessons you need to do, but you have the week and do them in your order.
Yeah, and then also realizing, do they want to do the really fun, the stuff they find interesting first, or do they want to do the boring and monotonous stuff to just get it done with? And then one of the big things we've instituted, especially this year, is consequences for not finishing. So last year, we kind of spot checked it. They kind of got away with some stuff. They could say they did stuff they learned very quickly if they just checked these check marks. It was recorded as complete, so we switched software and now it tracks them. Now they don't get punished, it's just they don't get video game time. Well, the light died in the middle of this interview, but we're just going to keep going with it. So, like I said, we don't really punish our kids. It's just they can't get as much screen time when they want to do fun stuff or television or play video games. They don't complete what they were supposed to do on the website.
So why is the website different? Like, why is it okay if they don't finish that? Is that their main curriculum, or is that?
No, that's really more of a supplemental. So that's the reinforcing, the repetition, where you learn it, say it, do it, teach it type thing. So it's more of that reinforcing stuff, because again, sometimes there's stuff that they'll learn better from us, and then there's other times they'll learn stuff better from a computer. The computer has a lot of additional resources and different ways to really reinforce that material.
Okay. So you have your instructor. You're a licensed instructor.
Yep.
So, as an instructor, how do you view homeschooling? Do you think that there's a specific pedagogy or a specific technique that's better, or do you think that depends on the teacher, the students?
It depends a lot on the student, in my opinion. I think some kids do better with homeschooling. From what I've seen, there are some parents who do better with homeschooling. I have not, I've seen a lot and read a lot about unschooling, where basically you don't teach anything. It's just all teachable moments. You really let the child direct their learning. That I haven't seen a lot of success from. Now I have had, when I was teaching college, I have had a couple of homeschooled students, and a lot of times they do excel, but none of them have ever been from an unschooling background. So I do think that there needs to be some structure, and again, a lot of homeschoolers want to get away from the structure and away from the kind of the authority figures of school. But the problem is that our society is built so much around those types of structures and ideas that I feel some of these kids are going to be ill prepared when they do leave the home and head out. So I do believe in structure when it comes to homeschooling. I think that's, as an instructor, I think that really helps them for when they get into the real world.
Okay. So as an instructor, what do you think of your wife's teaching methods as far as how she homeschools?
I think she does pretty good. There is structure in there. There is, the right amount of discipline for the children, and allowing them, though, to have freedom to still do their own, but to draw them in and really look at, yes, you have to do social studies, you have to do math. Just because you're not interested in it doesn't mean we can skip it. So really trying to keep pushing them to get those really core subjects down. Again, where I've seen some homeschoolers, if they're not liking math, well, they just won't be a mathematician and they skip over it. I do believe we have very well-rounded curriculums and very well-rounded education when it comes to our children's schooling. But I do approve of her methods and where we're directing our children.
So if there's anything that you would tell new homeschooling dads to support mom in homeschooling, what would you say?
The big one is the open communication. I think has helped us a lot, is really talk about it, talk about your fears and concerns, listen to her fears and concerns. When she gets into her curriculum porn phase, try to do the best you can to listen to it and try to understand, do some research on it, because there is some very interesting topics. But I feel, especially some of the other homeschooling fathers who I've met, there's very little communication going on as far as what the mom is actually doing during the day, and why a child might not be excelling as much as dad might think they should be, and then also just involving them in that day. A lot of fathers will feel very disconnected when it comes to their child's education. And then to also remember, a lot of dads are into the football games, the bake sales, so when they get frustrated with homeschooling, there might be what might seem to you as a frivolous reason to be upset, This is something where a lot of dads find pride in. My kids out there playing basketball or taking the cookie order sheet. I don't know how many of those I bought in cookies or candles or popcorn to support a field trip, and there's no way I can ever have another parent actually pay that back to me. So it's not like I can bring in my kids, sell candy bars for my kid, which can be frustrating for a father, especially during certain times of the school year, the regular academic school year, where they just know they're not going to be involved in it.
Well, there are some fundraisers and things like that you could do as a homeschool family, but I think in my experience they have been fairly rare, and few and far between.
They're pretty rare, and then there's also the little experience I do have with that. People kind of question, because it's not actually going to a big school. It's basically going into your bank account to support,
or to a co-op.
Or to a co-op. Yeah. I've seen some private ones, and you're kind of questioning. What was that money really going to go to a trip to take the band to Disney World when it's one kid with a kazoo in their homeschool? So.
I see. So you touched on it a little bit with religion. How are you able to, explore religion more in homeschool than maybe in public school?
Well, especially recently, not when we started homeschooling, but there's been a current shift away from mention of any religious aspects in school, whether that's praying at a touchdown was a big thing when I went to high school. The athletes would have a prayer circle. So they'd say a quick prayer, they'd do the sign of the cross, in the end zone. A lot of high schools have moved to get rid of that. There's been also a push to get rid of even the Bible from being studied inside school, even though you don't have to teach it as this is what you should believe. It is an amazing literary document that can be utilized for many lessons, including everything from history to science to medicine, to just language arts in general. The writings in it can be very beautiful. But it's one of those things where we had a professor in college who showed us how religion has taken this sharp turn. He went up to go give a lecture in humanities. He says, all right, quickly, let's just say a quick prayer. He did the sign of the cross. And you had people actively get angry at him and want to walk out. Because we've had this huge shift away from religion inside of public setting not being acceptable. You've seen that more and more as time has gone on.
And what about the whole separation of church and state? Did that mean religion was not acceptable then?
Well, from what I've learned actually from my homeschooling studies that I've had with my children, the separation of church and state actually never ended up in the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, or the Bill of Rights. It was actually Thomas Jefferson said in a letter that he believes there should be this separation of the church and the state. And I understand that, but what you run into is it's not like the local bishop or local priest is telling the school how to run their school district. Now, that of course changes if they go to Catholic school, of course. But just because someone wants to do a lesson on religion or teach a religious topic or use a religious text in the format of a curriculum should not be disallowed. And even have where students have stuff like when we were over in the Sioux, they had a Right to Life group they wanted to start in the local high school. And they kept saying separation of church and state, separation of church and state. Well, it wasn't the church coming in demanding this. It was students who were interested in Right for Life. And they were actively being barred from meeting, saying that you cannot have religious-based organizations, which I feel is very wrong, because we're trying to give the idea of school is to expose them to a wide variety of thoughts and ideas, but yet the public schools are giving them a very one-track view of the world.
So tolerance is not necessarily accepting that it's right, but tolerance should be, it's allowed, it's just not forced. So a religious group should be allowed, but not forced on any single student.
And I think, yes, it very much should be, in a school setting, they should have access to everything. So if a Muslim group wanted to come in and talk about the Muslim religion, or a Buddhist group wanted to talk about the Buddhist religion, I think that should be allowed. Give children that global view. That's something some homeschoolers are very much against. They don't want that. We actually have kind of embraced that. So we had some Jehovah's Witness talk about they wanted to come preach to us. Now Catholics and Jehovah's Witnesses really don't mesh well. They don't. We don't have the same views. But I encourage them to come during our schooling to give the kids a lesson, so they had a view of what Jehovah's Witnesses are. Now, granted, we were there and we kind of told the kids maybe if there was any inaccurate information that these two individuals were misrepresenting the Catholic religion with, but it allowed our kids to actually see that. And I feel that we find that's not happening in public schools, where they allow for one set view to be expressed, and anything outside that view is instantly washed out.
Okay. So right now, Muslim and Arab is a very, and Arabic, and that's a really hot topic. Is that addressed in your homeschooling?
To the age appropriate level of our children. So we'll talk about, what do they believe? What don't they believe? How does it differ? What's the difference between how the Muslim faith believes, with Muhammad, versus the Catholics, and then some fun facts about the two. We explain that there have been many attacks on the United States by extremists, by people of these religions who, in the name of their religion, did horrible things. But then it also allows us to talk about stuff like the Crusades or the Spanish Inquisition, so that we show that it's not just one group is worse than the other. They've all had their downsides. It's just currently there's a handful of religious groups worldwide that are causing more than other religious groups. So we don't go into the whole like Twin Towers crashing into there, cutting people's heads off, or stoning homosexuals to death, or beating women because they showed a tip of their toe when walking. That stuff we don't cover because that's not age appropriate.
I see. So, what was the overall? If you had to list an overall theme or thought for your homeschool, what would you say it is?
A lot of it is, let's just do it. A lot of the homeschooling has been, let's just do it. Let's let our daughter take Chinese. She wanted to take Chinese. She's interested in Chinese. She wants to speak Chinese. Okay, let's do it. Another daughter wants to learn coding. Okay, let's do it. Let's get some coding software and start coding. Some of the projects we do during the summer, whether it's we did a apocalypto summer survival Fridays, where we did different apocalyptic events because the kids had just read Last Kids on Earth and got really interested into apocalypse type events. We learn about living history, so going to forts. It just becomes okay, let's just do it. Let's go do it. If one of our kids wanted to, whatever it is, no matter how crazy it is, well, let's do it. Let's learn about it. Let's experience it. Let's try it out. Instead of having to be in this small little box, we really try to get them out there and experiencing stuff. Again, just saying, let's do it. Okay.
So with the pandemic, how has that affected homeschooling and just socialization or anything in general? We know some of the overall effects on public school kids with having virtual school and then in person and hybrid, and so that's been really rampant in the media. What's going on with the pandemic and education K through 12? How does it affect homeschool?
Well, as far as the curriculum goes, they're going to be ahead of their peers even more now. Where you hear a lot of schools talking about they're just going to pass them this year and they'll catch up next year, doing catch-up years. And that's not going to happen with our children because, again, we push on. We're very good at staying in place and locking down because we don't have to send our kids to school for their education. We don't rely on authority or the government to provide for our kids' education. We provide for their education. Now, what it does hurt, though, is that we do utilize a lot of socializing activities based around the public schools and public programs. So whether it's the Y Center, baseball leagues, the little leagues, There's art classes, there's libraries, lots of activities like that that are closed down. Our kids definitely are feeling that sheltered, shut in feeling that a lot of the public school kids are. The leg up they do have is at least a little bit, they are okay with being a part of a family unit. They can find entertainment and fun in their family. They already socialize with kids online in an acceptable manner. But they're feeling it too. They're definitely feeling the isolation because they can't go and do like theater, which our one daughter and son were really into, and we're going to get into again when that all shut down. So we're not weathering it with no problems, as we've been accused by a few people. We definitely, our children are intellectually aren't going to be damaged from it, but their mental well-being and socially they are, because they don't have those interactions with other kids. As public school the same, they're not having the interactions because they're just not allowed.
Very good. So we talked about the pandemic and how it affects homeschooling, and how does the library being closed, how does that work? Because a lot of homeschoolers utilize the library for resources.
Well, one, it is where groups are held. So there's group meetings, there's get-togethers and organizations. There's the idea of going out to find resources. And although they might not socialize with people their own age, we find that they'll actually socialize with maybe someone older there, which is an interesting lesson where people are very big about, all the 12th graders have to talk to 12th graders. Then you get out into the real world, and right now at 37, I am working with a lady who is 22. I'm working with another one who's 43, another one who's 64. I'm not socializing with anyone my own age, not even close to it. So our kids learn how to talk to adults. They learn how to talk to people younger than them. And the library is one of those good meshing, melding places where you just don't know who you're going to run into, but usually they're willing to talk and socialize with you.
I see. So we touched briefly about you working, and you're the primary breadwinner. So does your wife work, and how does that work with homeschooling?
And it was one of my principles when we first started homeschooling, that since my wife was the one being the teacher, I would do everything in my power to make sure she would stay at home and not have to worry about work. So taking extra hours, working longer shifts, because I believe that was my way of supporting homeschooling. That kind of changed recently now, where she now does do some two part-time jobs, which really helps out support things. Although I do miss being the sole provider of income, because it did give me a sense of accomplishment, a sense of pride, and a sense that I'm doing my part. That I was really, even though I wasn't there to do the schooling during the day, I was able to support it in a fiduciary way.
So are you taking on more homeschooling capacity now that your wife is working? And
I did during the summer and the weekends. Not as much, since now I'm working from home because of the beer flu.
The beer flu.
The beer flu. I am doing stuff like making lunches to be the support the homeschooling effort, so my wife doesn't have to. But now our children are very, and this is one of the things we also push, is for them to be autodidactic, where they really strive to learn because they want to learn. So the 4 older ones, they want to learn. They'll pursue knowledge. They'll search it. They'll research it. They'll take classes on it. So a lot of the teaching burden has been lifted from my wife. So it's not so heavily on her. She still does do in the morning, does all the core subjects. But a lot of the kids want to learn, which makes it a little easier.
I see. I think we're ready to wrap it up. Did you have anything else you would like to share with dads that are looking at homeschooling or are in the midst of homeschooling?
Again, big one, make sure you have the communication with your spouse. It's, there are, it does take for the fathers a change in mentality when it comes to that, what to be proud of. Maybe they're not going to be a part of the football team. But really embracing the stuff they are into, and getting excited and talking up maybe even projects to your coworkers. Like your coworkers talk up them being a part of the Little League team or the high school track and field. There are stuff there, but also remember that if there's something you feel that public school kids are getting that yours aren't, pursue it. Set up, we went to a dance. They were really upset that a lot of the homeschool kids weren't having proms. So the local homeschool co-op set up a prom so the kids could have that experience and have those stories. And then also just remember that there's a lot of freedom that comes with homeschooling, and to embrace that freedom. Be spontaneous as a father. And it's okay to make your kids take a hillbilly holiday, or as I like to call them, instead of snow days, we have sunny days where you just tell your wife, you know what, school's done. And then we're just going to go do something else. So all right, this was fun. Thank you very much, Teacher Lena, for being a part of willing to switch roles like this and kind of wrapping up our 3-part series on homeschooling. So we'll have to have you back maybe, talk more homeschooling, or to not play this game that we don't know each other and just have some open conversations. So any closing messages you have?
I don't think so this time.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you all stay safe, and we'll talk to you later.